The morning sunlight spilled gently across Maria's bedroom, brushing her cheeks with warmth. Today was the day she had dreamed of for years, the day she would become Antonio's wife. She sat on the edge of the ornate chair, her fingers nervously tracing the lace of her gown, heart racing with excitement. Every detail had been meticulously planned. The flowers, the catering, even the intricate lacework on the dress her mother had insisted she wear. Yet, beneath the anticipation, a faint tremor of unease clung to her thoughts, like a shadow at the corner of her mind. Her reflection in the mirror revealed a smile, but it was tinged with apprehension. Maria had always believed in love, in loyalty, in a man who would cherish her until the end. Antonio had seemed perfect. A charming smile, the right words at the right moments, the kind of man who could make anyone feel adored. Still, a fleeting memory of whispered calls she had overheard and a sense of fleeting glances he sometimes stole at his phone unsettled her. She pushed it aside, telling herself that this was just wedding nerves. The church bells tolled, echoing through the quiet streets outside, signaling that the ceremony would soon begin. Maria inhaled deeply, tasting the faint scent of roses and jasmine in the air, grounding herself in the present. Her mother approached, smoothing a stray lock of hair and whispering, "You look radiant, Maria. Today, everything changes." Her words should have comforted her, but instead they heightened the tension coiling in her chest. Outside, guests gathered, their laughter blending with the gentle rustle of wedding gowns. Antonio stood at the altar, waiting, his back straight, his head bowed slightly in what Maria perceived as solemnity. Or was it impatience? Her pulse quickened as she approached, each step echoing through the long marble aisle. The room seemed to hold its breath, the soft organ music swelling with a resonance that made her stomach flutter with a mix of joy and unease. As Antonio looked up, his smile was dazzling, perfectly practiced, yet Maria felt a flicker of something she could not name, an unfamiliar sharpness in his eyes. She forced herself to believe in the love they had declared in letters, in promises made in whispered nights, in vows rehearsed in quiet confidence. The officiant began, and their voices mingled in harmony with the sacred words. But Maria's mind kept catching fragments of fear, like tiny splinters under the skin. When the ceremony concluded and they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, a murmur of applause swept through the chapel. Maria felt her heart swell with joy, yet somewhere deep inside, an uneasy question lingered, subtle and persistent, like the whisper of a storm on the horizon. She smiled, clutching Antonio's hand, trying to anchor herself in this moment of happiness. But in the shadows of her mind, a premonition had already begun to form. A tiny seed of doubt that would soon grow, intertwining with the love she clung to. The reception awaited, glittering under chandeliers, promising laughter and celebration, but for Maria, the first threads of tension were quietly taking root. The morning after the wedding, Maria awoke to sunlight filtering softly through the curtains, but the warmth did little to chase away the cold knot forming in her stomach. Antonio lay beside her, his breathing steady, serene, while she stared at the ceiling, replaying snippets of conversations from the night before. There had been small things, almost imperceptible. His distracted glances, the way he checked his phone under the table, smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. Shadows of doubt, faint at first, began to creep into her mind. The honeymoon suite overlooked the sparkling waters of Manila Bay, a paradise painted in gold and blue. Yet Maria felt a strange dissonance, as though the beauty outside contrasted sharply with the unease inside her. She tried to speak with Antonio, to confirm that nothing was amiss, but each word felt stilted, heavy with fear she did not fully understand. Later, Lila, Maria's oldest friend, arrived at the suite unannounced, her presence bringing comfort and subtle tension in equal measure. She hugged Maria tightly, her eyes scanning the room with a faint curiosity that Maria found unsettling. "You look happy," Lila said, but her voice carried a strange undertone, a hint of something unsaid. Maria smiled, forcing herself to relax. "I am," she replied, though the truth of it felt fragile, hanging by a thread. As the day wore on, Maria observed Antonio closely. He spoke to hotel staff with practiced charm, yet every time his phone buzzed, he tensed, excusing himself to private corners. Maria's heart pounded with a mixture of suspicion and fear. She began to notice patterns she could not ignore. Whispered conversations, sudden text notifications erased too quickly, fleeting expressions that hinted at duplicity. "Do you think he's hiding something?" Maria asked Lila that evening as they sat by the balcony, the bay lights twinkling like distant stars. Lila hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know, Maria, but sometimes we see what we don't want to. Keep your eyes open." Her warning was gentle yet sharp like the prick of a thorn. Maria nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. The seed of doubt had been planted, and now it was beginning to grow. That night, Maria lay awake, listening to the distant hum of the city below. Shadows danced across the room, distorted by the moonlight, reflecting her restless thoughts. She imagined Antonio walking through the hallways of their paradise, whispering words to someone invisible, betraying the vows she had so dearly treasured. Every laugh, every smile during the reception replayed in her mind, now tinged with suspicion. By the end of the evening, Maria could no longer dismiss the unease. Her emotions were tangled, a mixture of love, fear, and the first hints of anger. She realized that this paradise was not as perfect as it seemed. Beneath the glittering surface, secrets lurked, and she was only beginning to sense their shape. As Maria stared out over the bay, the dark water reflecting the faint glow of the city, she promised herself she would uncover the truth. Whatever it took, she would know the reality of Antonio's heart and that of anyone else entwined in it. The first threads of doubt had grown into a persistent shadow, setting the stage for a discovery that would shatter everything Maria had believed in, leading her directly toward the hidden affair that awaited in the next chapter. Maria had tried to ignore the gnawing unease, telling herself that shadows in paradise were just illusions born of exhaustion. But by the third night of the honeymoon, she could no longer ignore the signs. Antonio had excused himself repeatedly, always with a faint excuse, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maria's curiosity and growing dread compelled her to follow. Quietly, she retrieved his phone left carelessly on the nightstand, his thumb still brushing the screen as he slept. At first, she hesitated, knowing that prying could shatter their fragile illusion. But the small lock of dread inside her demanded action. The messages were brief, flirty, unmistakably intimate. Each one made her stomach turn, each one a dagger wrapped in casual words. Names, dates, hidden plans. Antonio's fingers had danced over the screen with a freedom Maria had never known in their marriage. And then there was Clara. The name appeared repeatedly, always accompanied by coy emojis and affectionate language. A trembling wave of disbelief washed over her. Maria's mind raced, refusing to accept the truth. "It can't be real," she whispered to herself, voice barely audible, shaking the phone as if that could make it vanish. But the evidence was irrefutable. Her husband, the man she had vowed to love, was betraying her, weaving a secret life in the shadows of their paradise. Her eyes filled with tears, yet her anger surged stronger than sorrow. She pictured Antonio's smile, the gentle way he had held her hand at the altar, and now it felt like mockery. The thought of Clara laughing in some hidden corner invaded Maria's mind with a sharp, consuming fire. Her heart pounded, each beat a drum of betrayal. She felt the first stirrings of something darker, an urgent need to confront, to act, to reclaim control over her fractured world. The next morning, Maria attempted casual conversation with Antonio over breakfast, forcing her voice light, her smiles practiced. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, watching him closely. He nodded, oblivious to the storm raging in her mind. She measured her words, careful not to reveal that she had seen his secret. "Everything's perfect, isn't it?" she murmured, almost hoping for reassurance. But his laughter, easy and unguarded, confirmed nothing. Later, Maria sought counsel from Lila. Her friend's eyes widened ever so slightly as Maria mentioned the strange messages she had glimpsed in passing. "Maria, I've had my suspicions too, Lila admitted, voice low and hesitant. Sometimes the people we trust the most hide the darkest things. The words pierced Maria like a sharpened knife, and a cold clarity settled over her. The paradise she had imagined was built on deceit. By evening, Maria's thoughts had twisted into obsession. She recalled every fleeting glance, every offhand comment, now illuminated by the knowledge of Antonio's betrayal. She could almost trace the contours of his hidden affair, anticipate his secret steps, and feel Clara's presence as if it were a living shadow in the room with them. Sleep became impossible. The darkness outside mirrored the turmoil within. As she stared through the balcony doors at the city lights, her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar. Eyes hardened, jaw clenched, a mind teetering on the edge between grief and rage. Maria understood that ignoring the truth was no longer an option. She would have to confront the betrayal, and when she did, nothing would remain the same. The hidden affair, once invisible, had revealed itself in cruel, undeniable light. Maria's heart raced, her mind spinning with the knowledge that the coming confrontation would force her deeper into darkness, setting the stage for the emotional manipulation and deceit she would face in the next chapter. Maria's hands shook as she held Antonio's phone, the evidence of betrayal still fresh in her mind. Her chest tightened with a mix of hurt and rage, yet when she confronted him later that evening, she struggled to keep her voice steady. "Antonio, I saw the messages," she said, eyes wide, heart pounding. Her words trembled, but the pain behind them was undeniable. Antonio leaned back, a faint smile curling on his lips, his expression carefully neutral. "You're imagining things, Maria. It's nothing," he said softly, his tone smooth, practiced. He reached out, taking her hands in his, and the warmth of his touch made her question her own senses. Could it be that she had misinterpreted harmless jokes? Could her jealousy have blinded her? Maria's mind reeled. The evidence burned bright, impossible to ignore, yet Antonio's calm demeanor made her second-guess reality. He spoke of stress at work, miscommunications and fatigue, each excuse woven with a meticulous charm that clouded the truth. Every lie was layered with intimacy, forcing Maria to confront the conflict within her own heart, love or betrayal. Later, Lila visited, sensing Maria's turmoil. She studied her friend carefully, noting the tremor in her voice and the haunted look in her eyes. "You deserve the truth, Maria," Lila whispered, cautious but firm. "Don't let him twist your reality. Trust what you know in your heart." Maria nodded silently, absorbing the warning, but doubt still gnawed at the edges of her resolve. The evening deepened, shadows stretching across the walls of their hotel suite. Maria's gaze wandered over Antonio's carefully arranged belongings, his watch, cufflinks, and neatly folded shirts. Every detail now carried a hidden meaning in her mind, a subtle reflection of deception. She imagined Clara, the mistress whose name haunted her every thought, and shivers ran down her spine. Antonio's denial was a weapon, expertly wielded to keep her suspended between disbelief and suspicion. By nightfall, Maria found herself pacing the balcony, the city lights twinkling like distant stars, mocking in their beauty. The air was thick with tension, carrying the faint scent of the sea, a reminder of paradise that had soured into suspicion. Each breath she drew seemed heavy, laden with the knowledge of what lurked beneath Antonio's charming exterior. "Maria, you're overthinking." Antonio's voice broke the silence, calm and controlled as he appeared behind her. She turned, fury and desperation flashing across her face. "Am I? Or are you the one hiding everything?" The confrontation hung between them, fragile yet charged, a battle of truths and half-truths. Antonio's eyes softened, but Maria could sense the practiced manipulation beneath. The night wore on, and Maria's emotional state began to fray. She could no longer distinguish between love and betrayal, reality and illusion. Her mind replayed Antonio's reassurances and dismissals, each phrase a poisoned thread entwined with her own growing paranoia. The psychological tension tightened, her emotions oscillating wildly between heartbreak and anger. As she lay in bed that night, Staring at the ceiling, Maria understood that denial could not protect her forever. The cracks in Antonio's facade had revealed themselves, and soon deeper truths would surface. The emotional manipulation, the web of lies, and the betrayals that now defined her reality were only the beginning. She knew with chilling certainty that uncovering the next layer of deceit would push her closer to the edge and toward the confrontation that awaited. Maria's days had become a relentless blur of observation and suspicion. Every glance Antonio threw, every whispered phone call felt like a blade cutting into the fragile shell of trust she had once clung to. The paradise of their honeymoon had transformed into a labyrinth of deceit, each shadow hiding a secret, each smile masking betrayal. She had begun to notice patterns: Antonio's sudden absences, erased text messages, late-night phone calls cloaked as work emergencies. The evidence was mounting, undeniable, yet terrifying in its clarity. Her obsession deepened one quiet evening when she decided to check Antonio's wallet. A receipt fell out, small, innocuous, but marked with a name she did not expect: Clara. Her stomach churned as she examined the note, the faintest hint of perfume lingering on the paper. She held it close, feeling a rush of both fury and fear. Maria's hands trembled, her pulse racing as she pieced together the timeline of Antonio's secret life. The evidence impossible to ignore, unable to contain her emotions. Maria confronted Lila during a brief visit. "Have you noticed anything strange?" she asked, her voice tight, barely above a whisper. Lila's eyes widened, and for a moment Maria thought she had pushed too far. I don't know," Lila said carefully, glancing at the floor. "Sometimes people hide things, even from those they love. Just trust your instincts, Maria." The words lingered, sharp and ambiguous, as if Lila was warning her yet withholding a truth of her own. That night, Maria followed Antonio to a meeting he claimed was with a business associate. Shadows of Manila's streets stretched long under the dim streetlights as she trailed him silently, heart hammering in her chest. He entered a nondescript apartment building, and Maria's breath caught when she saw Clara appear from a side door, smiling at Antonio with familiarity too intimate to ignore. The sight confirmed what she already knew: her husband's betrayal was real and now tangible. Her mind whirled with questions. How long had this affair been going on? Had he ever loved her at all? And why? Why had Lila's reaction seemed so guarded, so careful? A gnawing suspicion crept into her thoughts. Was her best friend complicit, knowingly or unknowingly, in Antonio's duplicity? Maria felt the first real cracks forming in her perception of loyalty, trust, and friendship. Returning to the hotel suite, Maria's hands shook as she examined Antonio's belongings once more. Each detail now told a story: receipts, tiny notes, the faint scent of a perfume that was not hers. She realized that her world, the one she had thought secure and filled with love, was fracturing. The cracks were no longer subtle. They were jagged, bleeding into every corner of her life. By morning, Maria's emotions had hardened into determination. Grief, betrayal, and suspicion had fused, creating a sharp edge within her psyche. She could no longer passively endure the deceit. Something had to be done. The first crack had become a canyon, and she teetered on the brink, aware that every step forward would pull her deeper into darkness. As the city awoke outside, the air carried a metallic tang, a prelude to the storm Maria could already feel gathering inside. The evidence was undeniable, the betrayal complete, and her mind was racing with possibilities. What came next would demand courage, cunning, and a willingness to confront the truths that had remained hidden, setting the stage for the obsessive pursuit that awaited in Obsession Takes Hold. Maria's mind had become a tempest, relentless and unyielding. Each moment of the day, each mundane action, was overshadowed by the thoughts of Antonio and Clara. She could no longer distinguish between intuition and paranoia. The two had fused into a single driving force. Her love had warped into something darker, a consuming obsession that left her restless, sleepless, and dangerously focused. Every detail of Antonio's movements, every whispered word she recalled, became a clue in a puzzle that demanded resolution. She began to track his daily routines with meticulous precision. The office visits, the business lunches, even the minor errands that once seemed trivial now held significance. Maria followed him discreetly through the streets of Manila, moving through the shadows like a phantom. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, adrenaline sharpening her senses. Each corner she turned, each dimly lit alley she passed, heightened the tension. She imagined Clara waiting, smiling conspiratorially, a reminder of the betrayal that had transformed her world. One evening, as the city lights glimmered against the dark waters of the bay, Maria lingered near Antonio's office building. She observed him through the tinted glass, noticing his casual laughter, the intimate way Clara leaned close. A wave of rage mixed with grief surged through her chest, leaving her shaking. She whispered to herself, voice tight with fury, "I will know everything. Nothing will remain hidden." The words were not a question. They were a promise. Back in the suite, she pored over every detail of Antonio's personal effects. Receipts, notes, even the faint scent of perfume that lingered where Clara had visited. Maria's room, once a sanctuary of marital bliss, had become a war room. Each item told a story, each observation reinforcing the depth of the betrayal. She began cataloging patterns, creating mental maps of their interactions, predicting where they might go next, and imagining the conversations she would force from them. Lila visited once more, sensing Maria's growing instability. "You need to be careful, Maria," she said, concern etched across her features. "Obsession can consume a person." "Even the strongest!" Maria's eyes flashed, a mixture of anger and determination. "I have to see the truth, Lila. I cannot ignore it." "I won't." The warning fell on deaf ears. Her need for clarity had eclipsed caution. The nights became the most dangerous. Maria would sit at the balcony, staring at the dark streets, envisioning Antonio and Clara's clandestine meetings. Every car that passed, every shadow that flickered, became part of her investigation. Sleep became impossible, replaced by a feverish, almost ritualistic vigil. The line between justice and revenge blurred in her mind, replaced by an unshakable certainty that action would soon be necessary. She began rehearsing confrontations in her mind, imagining the words, the tension, the control she would need to assert. Her emotions oscillated wildly, grief, anger, fear, and a strange exhilaration at the thought of finally exposing the truth. Each scenario was vivid, cinematic, a rehearsal for the confrontation she could no longer delay. By the end of the week, Maria's obsession had reached a tipping point. She could no longer tolerate waiting, and the threads of betrayal had woven a cage she could no longer escape. Her heart raced at the thought of facing Antonio and Clara, and she realized that the path she had chosen would leave nothing untouched. The darkness outside mirrored the storm within her. Rain began to fall, pattering softly against the balcony, echoing the tension that had consumed her entirely. Maria understood with chilling clarity that the confrontation was inevitable. The stage was set, the players positioned, and the next chapter of her life, the confrontation, was about to unfold in full, terrifying clarity. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil inside Maria's mind. Rain hammered against the windows of the secluded villa she had chosen for the night, a place she knew Antonio would never expect her to lead him. Every detail had been meticulously planned. The room's dim lighting, the locked doors, the subtle placement of objects that would restrict escape. This confrontation was no longer about discussion. It was about uncovering the full truth, and if necessary, reclaiming control over the betrayal that had consumed her. Antonio arrived with Clara, their smiles forced and unaware of the depth of Maria's fury. Maria's pulse quickened as she measured their movements, every glance and gesture catalogued in her mind. The tension between the three of them was tangible, vibrating through the air with each step they took into the dimly lit living room. The storm outside threw shadows across the walls, mirroring the unease etched into Maria's face. "You wanted to see us?" Antonio asked, his voice calm, carefully neutral. but Maria could see the flicker of caution in his eyes. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, trying to steady the rage and grief she felt. Yes, I need the truth. All of it. Her voice was quiet, but edged with steel, the calm before the inevitable storm. Clara's smile faltered, replaced with a nervous tension. Maria, I don't, she began, but Maria cut her off with a sharp glance. No lies, she demanded. I've seen everything. The messages, the meetings, the betrayals. I want the truth now, before it's too late to admit it. Her words hung in the room like a guillotine, heavy and irreversible. Antonio's practiced calm wavered, a slight tightening around his jaw betraying him. He tried to soothe the situation, reaching out to touch Maria's arm. You're overreacting. It's complicated, but nothing changes how I feel about you. Maria recoiled instinctively, anger and disbelief flaring in equal measure. Don't touch me. You've been lying from the moment we married. Your words mean nothing. Clara shifted uneasily, stepping back, eyes darting between Maria and Antonio. I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered, voice trembling. The confession was like a match struck in dry grass. The room seemed to catch fire, the tension snapping to its breaking point. Maria's chest heaved, heart hammering, mind racing with thoughts she barely dared to think aloud. You don't get to justify this, Maria shouted, voice echoing against the walls. You destroyed everything. Both of you! She felt a shiver of exhilaration and fear, the psychological edge sharpening, as if the room itself had condensed into the crucible of betrayal and revenge. Shadows stretched across the walls, distorted by the flickering candlelight, reflecting the twisted reality of the confrontation. Antonio's attempts at rationalization faltered as Maria pressed on, unrelenting. She revealed the receipts, the messages, every small fragment of proof she had collected, laying them bare like weapons on the table. Clara's eyes filled with tears while Antonio's composure cracked, revealing a man cornered, vulnerable, exposed. Maria's pulse raced. The emotional and psychological power had shifted entirely into her hands. By the end of the night, the confrontation had reached its peak. Silence descended over the villa, broken only by the storm outside. Maria stood in the center, trembling, heart pounding with adrenaline and a dark sense of satisfaction. She had forced the truth into the open, and now the consequences, inevitable and terrifying, awaited. The storm outside subsided, leaving a tense, fragile quiet. Maria knew that the next steps, decisions that would blur morality and sanity, were unavoidable. The confrontation had peeled away all illusions. The next chapter would force actions that could not be undone. The villa was silent, save for the distant hum of the city beyond the rain-slicked streets. Maria's hands shook as she held the small knife she had taken from the kitchen, the cold metal biting into her palm. Her mind raced, a cyclone of grief, betrayal, and rage that had been building since the first stolen glance, the first secret message, the first lie. Every heartbeat was deafening, every breath a struggle against the torrent of emotion consuming her. Antonio and Clara were oblivious to the storm raging inside her. They had returned to the living room, whispering quietly, attempting to salvage some semblance of calm. Maria watched them, each movement of their hands, each glance they shared, inflaming the fire within her. She felt time stretching, each second drawn out like the slow drip of water in a dark cave. The world outside ceased to exist. All that remained was the betrayal in front of her, palpable and suffocating. She stepped forward, knife trembling in her hand, eyes locked on Antonio first. It ends tonight, she whispered, barely audible, her voice a mixture of resolve and horror at what she was about to do. Antonio looked up, confusion flickering across his features. Maria, what are you? His words were cut off by the suddenness of her movement. A blur of motion fueled by years of suppressed anger and heartbreak. Clara screamed, a high, piercing sound that made Maria flinch for a split second. But the noise only sharpened her focus. Every betrayal, every secret kiss, every stolen word replayed in her mind, giving her a clarity born of fury. Antonio tried to rise, reaching toward her, but Maria was faster. The knife plunged forward, her hands guided by desperation and rage rather than calculation. The moment stretched into eternity. Blood blossomed like a dark flower, the metallic scent filling the room, overwhelming her senses. Antonio gasped, eyes wide in shock, a final whisper of disbelief escaping his lips. Maria's vision blurred, tears streaming down her face as she realized the irrevocable consequences of her actions. Clara's terrified sobs echoed, and Maria's gaze shifted to her, equally consumed by betrayal, equally implicated in the destruction of trust. "Please, Maria!" Clara whimpered, voice breaking. Maria's own heart pounded, a mixture of triumph and terror coursing through her veins. She felt the adrenaline fading, leaving raw, trembling realization in its wake. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. The room seemed to close in around her, the shadows growing longer, more distorted, reflecting the darkness she had embraced in the act. The world outside remained indifferent. Rain fell against the windows, a soft, relentless rhythm, mirroring the pounding in Maria's chest. She sank to the floor, knife slipping from her hands, tears streaming freely. Silence replaced the chaos, but the weight of what she had done pressed down with suffocating intensity. The paradise she had once believed in had been irrevocably destroyed, replaced by the stark reality of murder and the consequences that would follow. Clara remained frozen, eyes wide and unblinking, her sobs gradually slowing. Maria looked at her, seeing not just a rival, but a reflection of everything lost, everything corrupted by deception. Guilt and rage warred within her, a storm that would not subside. She understood that this moment would define the rest of her life. The memory of betrayal and the act of revenge forever entwined. By dawn, Maria had cleaned the worst of the evidence, but the psychological weight remained. The adrenaline faded, leaving exhaustion, horror, and an eerie calm that only the finality of death could bring. She stared out at the first light of morning, knowing that the consequences of her actions would soon arrive. The murder had ended the immediate betrayal, but it had begun a new chapter, a psychological descent that could not be undone. The world she had known was gone, replaced by a reality forged in blood, fear, and the chilling knowledge that justice, truth, and retribution had collided in the most extreme way imaginable. The silence after the storm was almost unbearable. Maria sat slumped in the dimly lit villa, the early morning light casting cold shadows across the room. Her hands were stained with the memory of what she had done, the knife now discarded on the floor, forgotten yet emblematic of the irrevocable choices she had made. The adrenaline that had fueled her moments ago had dissipated, leaving raw exhaustion, fear, and a gnawing emptiness that settled deep in her chest. The distant sound of sirens cut through the quiet, growing louder, a harsh reminder that nothing could remain hidden forever. Maria's mind raced as she replayed the events of the night, each image sharper, each emotion more acute. Antonio's shocked eyes, Clara's terrified sobs, the metallic tang of blood, all replayed in a relentless loop, a dark montage she could not escape. She had taken justice into her own hands, but the cost was already apparent. Freedom, peace, and the fragile innocence of her soul were gone. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sharp knock at the door. "Police, open up!" The words shattered the fragile calm, jolting Maria to her feet. She moved cautiously, heart hammering, sweat glistening on her brow as she unlocked the door. Officers entered, their expressions measured, professional, but behind the restraint Maria sensed judgment and inevitability. One officer spoke first. "Ma'am, we received reports, and neighbors mentioned unusual activity. We need to ask you some questions." Maria's lips trembled, her voice barely audible. I can explain." But the words felt hollow even to her ears. The room, once a stage of confrontation and vengeance, had become a cage of accountability. The weight of law and morality descended with relentless precision. Each question tightening the invisible chains around her, she was led from the villa, her hands bound, the cool morning air hitting her face like reality itself. Cameras flashed, neighbors whispered, and the city seemed to stare, reflecting back the enormity of her actions. Maria's mind drifted, recalling the sequence that had led her here, the stolen glances, secret messages, the web of lies, the confrontation, and finally the irreversible act of murder. Each step had been a descent, calculated yet emotionally uncontrollable, and now the consequences had arrived in full force. During the questioning, Maria remained mostly silent, her thoughts consumed by reflection and regret. She saw the faces of those she had loved and trusted, twisted now into images of betrayal and loss. "Did you feel remorse?" an officer asked gently, searching for insight. Maria's voice was hoarse. "Yes, but it was—" Too late. It was too late for anything but the truth. Her words were a confession of both guilt and clarity. She had acted out of rage and pain, but she understood that the act could not be undone. The media would later call it a crime of passion, a story of betrayal and revenge. Neighbors whispered about the paradise that had turned into a nightmare. Friends expressed shock, some disbelief, and a few secret admiration for the courage and decisiveness Maria had displayed. But beneath all of that, Maria knew the truth. No public opinion could cleanse the moral and psychological weight she now carried. In the quiet of her cell, Maria finally allowed herself to feel the full impact. Her hands rested on the cold, hard bench, her mind wandering through memories of love, deception, and rage. The world she had inhabited, full of warmth, trust, and hope, was gone. The paradise had ended, replaced by confinement, introspection, and the chilling permanence of her decisions. Even as she faced trial and the certainty of imprisonment, Maria's mind remained sharp, her psychological resolve intact. She understood the consequences of betrayal and the limits of human morality. The aftermath was harsh, unyielding, and permanent, but it was also a mirror of the truth she had demanded, a reflection of love turned into violence. Trust destroyed and justice, in its own dark way, served. The villa, once alive with laughter and light, was now silent, abandoned to memory. The city continued, indifferent to her fate. The storm passed, but the scars indelible. Maria stared at the small window, rain-streaked glass reflecting her own face, knowing that the story of betrayal, revenge, and murder would never truly end. It would live on, haunting both her and the world that had once seemed so full of promise. Maria could no longer sleep. Each night, the images of Antonio and Clara together replayed like a film she could not turn off. She had followed Antonio for days, noted the minutiae of his movements, and gathered pieces of evidence too damning to ignore. But it was the small, subtle clues, those that no one else would notice, that gnawed at her sanity. Every perfume trace, every erased text, every whispered word from Lila that hinted at knowing more than she admitted, built a tapestry of betrayal Maria could no longer ignore. Her apartment had transformed into a war room. Receipts were pinned to the walls with red string, maps were scrawled with times and locations, and photographs of Antonio and Clara, snapped from shadows, covered every flat surface. She moved among them with obsessive precision, piecing together a chronology of deceit that painted Antonio in a light too dark to reconcile with the man she had married. One evening, Maria confronted Lila again. "Tell me everything you know," she demanded, voice sharp with tension, eyes blazing. Lila hesitated, her hands twisting nervously. I didn't know it would go this far," she admitted finally, voice trembling. "I knew about some things, but I thought it was harmless." Maria felt a mix of betrayal and relief that her suspicions were justified, but betrayal that even her closest friend had played a part in the web of deception. The unraveling continued with Antonio. She discovered his secret financial transactions, discreet dinners logged in hidden accounts, and text threads full of affectionate, illicit exchanges with Clara. Every layer of his duplicity cut deeper, each revelation sharpening the edge of her anger and grief. She read each message aloud, whispering to herself, "How could you?" After everything, the emotional torment was palpable, burning like acid in her chest. Maria's nights became increasingly restless. She would sit by the balcony, staring at the city lights reflecting off the rain-slick streets, imagining Antonio and Clara meeting, laughing, and touching in ways that once belonged to her alone. Shadows seemed to move across the walls of her apartment, as if the very room were alive with the betrayals she had uncovered. Every flicker of movement outside the window, every passing car, every shadowed alley became part of her mental investigation. Unable to contain her growing obsession, Maria began rehearsing confrontations in her mind. She imagined the words she would say, the looks she would give, and the undeniable proof she would present. Her voice shook in these imagined scenes, her heart racing as she visualized the shock in Antonio's eyes, the fear in Clara's. Each rehearsal made the next step more concrete, more inevitable, until the confrontation was no longer a choice, but a psychological necessity. The culmination of Maria's unraveling came when she discovered the final piece of proof, an intimate photograph of Antonio and Clara, taken in a setting she recognized from the receipts and secret locations. Her stomach twisted violently. She could not believe the depth of the betrayal, and yet she could not deny it. Every lie, every secret rendezvous, every whispered excuse now had a face, and the evidence was irrefutable. Maria's pulse raced, her thoughts spinning. The city outside was dark, rain streaking down the windows like tears that mirrored her own. The psychological tension reached a breaking point. Anger, heartbreak, and desperation coalesced into a singular, overwhelming clarity. She understood that confronting them directly was no longer optional. It was inevitable. Her hands clenched around the knife she had taken from the kitchen earlier, a tool she had considered before but never dared to use. The unraveling of secrets had pushed her to the edge. The meticulous investigation, the obsessive tracking, and the emotional torment had all led to this point. Maria took a deep breath, heart hammering, mind sharp with grim resolve. The confrontation she had rehearsed in every detail was about to become reality. The courtroom smelled of polished wood, ink, and tension. Maria sat in the defendant's chair, hands folded, knuckles white. Months of investigation, psychological torment, and the murder itself had led to this moment. Outside, journalists jostled for position, cameras flashing intermittently, but Maria's focus was inward, tracing the path that had brought her here, from the first whispers of betrayal to the violent act that had shattered her life and the lives of others. Her mind replayed every detail. Antonio's smiles that had masked deceit, Clara's conspiratorial glances, Lila's hesitant warnings. The betrayal had been total, consuming, and unforgiving. Yet in this courtroom, Maria realized that the consequences were inescapable. Her own confession, inevitable and unflinching, would seal her fate. There was no escaping accountability. The law would now weigh the moral and psychological weight she carried. When the judge called her name, Maria rose. Her steps were measured, deliberate, echoing in the silent room. She met the eyes of the prosecution, the defense, and the jury. For the first time since the murder, she felt the crushing duality of relief and fear. Relief that she could finally speak the truth. Fear for the punishment that awaited her. "Maria Santiago," the judge began, voice steady and authoritative, "you stand before this court accused of the premeditated murder of Antonio Delgado and Clara Reyes. How do you plead?" Maria took a deep breath, the words forming with a mix of resignation and clarity. "Guilty, Your Honor. I committed these acts. I took their lives. I accept full responsibility." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Her confession, calm and precise, carried a chilling weight. The defense attorney interjected briefly, attempting to contextualize Maria's psychological state. "Your Honor, my client has suffered extreme emotional and psychological distress due to repeated betrayal and deception. While this does not excuse her actions, it explains the extraordinary circumstances that led to this tragic outcome." Maria listened silently, feeling a mixture of validation and shame. The truth was complicated. No words could fully capture the betrayal she had endured or the turmoil that had consumed her. During the hearing, Maria recounted the series of events leading up to the crime. She described her obsessive investigation, the confrontations, and the unraveling of secrets that had led to the climactic night. Her voice, though calm, trembled with emotion as she relived the confrontation in the courtroom, each detail reinforcing the inevitability of her actions. "I was broken," she said, voice quivering. "I trusted them and they betrayed me completely. I lost control. I did what I thought I had to do, though I know it was wrong." The judge listened intently, the jury absorbing every word. Maria's confession was complete, leaving nothing hidden. The evidence, already overwhelming, now merged with her own admissions, leaving the outcome clear yet morally complex. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the emotional and psychological devastation contained within the courtroom walls. As the sentencing phase began, Maria felt a strange sense of calm. She had spoken the truth, admitted her guilt, and faced the undeniable consequences of her actions. Justice, in its starkest form, was about to be delivered. The weight of secrecy, betrayal, and obsessive vengeance had been lifted from her chest, replaced with the heavy yet clarifying burden of accountability. The judge pronounced the sentence, years of imprisonment. The court's stern acknowledgement of the crime's severity, tempered only slightly by the psychological trauma Maria had endured. She listened, eyes steady, accepting the judgment as both punishment and penance. Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed, but she no longer noticed them. The world had changed irreversibly, and she would live with the consequences every day. In her cell later, Maria reflected on the path she had taken, the love, betrayal, obsession, and ultimate violence. She had confessed, accepted responsibility, and faced justice. Though freedom was gone, a measure of truth remained. The final act of confession did not undo the past, but it allowed her to confront it fully, an acknowledgement of guilt and humanity entwined. The echoes of the courtroom faded into silence, and Maria, alone in the small cold cell, felt the weight of her choices, the cost of truth, and the permanence of justice settle around her like a dark, unshakable veil.